Hey guys, I've got a 30-minute game on the board against a player that's rated 562, and what we're going to be looking at is the difference between the way that a beginner plays, rated 500 to 600, compared to myself, rated around 1450 at the moment. I had a shocking morning of chess. I went chess blind. So my opponent started with the slightly slow e3. I've just responded with d4, taking a little bit more control over the centre. So I'm controlling these two squares in my opponent's half of the board. My opponent is controlling these two squares, which are still in his own half of the board. Okay. So now he's played bishop to e2. So I'm just going to go ahead and put another pawn alongside. So my first pawn controlled these two squares, and now my second pawn has added these two as well. So now the space that my opponent has in his own half is now significantly reduced, and now he's moved his bishop back. So there's a principle one of the principles you want to follow in the opening is you don't want to move the same piece twice. So my opponent actually developed a piece, and then on the subsequent move has undeveloped it. Okay, so now his king is no nearer to castling because both this knight and this bishop have to move if he's going to castle kingside, and if he wants to castle queenside, then three pieces have to move. Right now, no pieces have moved, so he's not any nearer. He's no nearer castling, and what's more, his king is still in the middle of the board and is a little way off getting safe. So I've just developed a knight protecting my undefended pawn there on e5. My d pawn is protected by the queen. This pawn was undefended, and now I've defended it with a knight. So we'll see what my opponent does next. Okay, so we've got b3. So normally I would expect this would lead to a bishop fianchetto, maybe the knight coming out to c3. That's all seems reasonable. I'm just going to develop my other knight. Now I've got two defenders on this advanced pawn. There's no call right now to push my pawns any further forward. I'm much better off developing my final minor pieces, get my queen off the back rank, get my king castled. Okay, nice bishop has moved yet again. So it's moved f1 to e2, then back to f1, and now back to e2 again. So my opponent is significantly behind in development. If you actually count the development moves that he's done, he's brought out a pawn, which is a useful one. It does free up this bishop, and a second pawn and his bishop. So he's actually played three moves of development now. I've played four moves. So I have two minor pieces out on the board, and my pawns are also further forward. So now I'm just going to develop my bishop. I'm just going to play solidly. Bishop to d6, adding a second defender to my e5 pawn. It also blocks off the queen, so now this pawn here on d5 is only defended once. So I'm just going to bring up my other bishop to here and just add further defense. I'm not going out to slaughter my opponent. I want to give him time to play the moves that he or she wants to make. And now, interesting, rook to f1. So what this means is that because this rook has moved now, the king cannot castle kingside. That means he's going to have to castle queenside. So I would expect the bishop to come out, the knight to come out, and he's going to have to move something in order for the queen to get out into the board as well. So he's still at least 4-5 moves away now from completing development. I'm going to go ahead and castle. Then my plan is probably queen to e7. The bishop does come here, then I've got options of swapping off my dark squared bishop for white's dark squared bishop, which will leave a vulnerability on the queen side of the board on these dark squares. And if my queen is here on a3, that could be a threat. This knight still has to move, the bishop has to move, the queen has to move. We are way, way behind. Okay, now what he's done is he's moved a piece that was already developed a subsequent time. And that is generally inadvisable, and the reason it's inadvisable is because he's now invested this move in moving a knight with kind of a half-hearted attack against my bishop. I'm not concerned about that. If he wants to take my bishop, I can recapture the pawn. That's no skin off my nose. That's fine. But what this means is that with this move, he hasn't developed this knight or this bishop or done anything to get his queen out. So he's still in danger. And the king, also, you have to notice, has no squares to move to right now. Okay. So to complete development, all I need to do is move my queen off the back rank and connect my rooks together, where they are both defending each other, protecting each other, and they are patrolling the entire back rank. And from that point, when I've completed development, I can then think about pushing forward and launching some kind of assault into my enemy's position. So queen to e7, it protects his bishop, so now if knight takes bishop, I have the option of recapturing with a queen, but I've also got this idea of moving my bishop down there. That wouldn't work right now, while the knight and the bishop are still there, because he's got two attackers on that square. And now c3. Okay, this is now looking more precarious for his prospects of castling his king, which can only happen queenside. It's not looking great right now for white. Okay, so now I've completed the main part of development. I think my next step, I'm just going to centralize a rook. So I'm going to put a rook, I think a rook on d8 right now. And I might think about pushing my pawns up on the queen side and trying to attack my opponent's position there, because I know his king isn't going that way. If his king castles at all, it's going to be queenside, castling long. There are ideas of a discovered attack against the knight. So if I move my knight out of the way somewhere, maybe to be part of the attack, then this is an undefended knight. So if my opponent sees it, he might choose to exchange. Okay, so there's a half threat here. So he's looking at this pawn perhaps defended by the knight, but this pawn is actually defended twice as well. It's defended by my knight and then also defended by my king. So I don't have to be too concerned about that move just yet. Still have ideas, but of course I don't want to move this knight now, because then we would have queen h7 check, my king would have to move there, then queen to h8 could be very unpleasant. So I do need to proceed with some caution now. And I think e4 now would be a good prophylactic move. It's blocking off this queen's progress, and the queen's eyeing up of h7. That's absolutely fine. The knight's not going to take the pawn because I'll simply recapture. Okay, this is a useful idea. He's now challenging my pawn in the center. Every time a pawn moves, there's something is always slightly weakened. I think now bishop to here seems sensible. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 defenders of that pawn. What's more, if I take this pawn, that's a discovered attack against the queen. So I'm just trying to play in a very solid way. The queen's undefended. My bishop is also undefended where it is right now, so maybe something like g6 and then try and capture would probably win the bishop here, as well as the pawn on f3. Can't put my queen there to defend the bishop because knight can take. I could put my queen on d7 perhaps. Okay, and so now his bishop has actually retreated. That's interesting. Right, what's the best way to proceed from here? The king is still in the center of the board, and that's bad. Bad for white. I could drop my bishop back to g6, that seems very solid. It's still defending the pawn. Pawn's very well protected there, and it means that this bishop is now defended by 2 pawns. So rather than the other idea of pushing a pawn in front of my king, which I don't like to do unless I really have to, I think this is much more solid. Now the bishop's defended twice, so now I am threatening to capture on f3 with the discovery against the queen. What's my opponent going to do? I've still also got ideas of this undefended knight as well. So if this guy moves anywhere, then I'm attacking the knight. Okay, interesting. So now that's taken away my option of capturing with the pawn, with the discovery. But it also means that this pawn is now no longer threatening e4. Now there's only one pawn that could possibly have ideas about attacking there. This square is now taken away from the knight. If I were to attack the knight, say with h6 now, you can't go here or here or here or there. Can't take that pawn either, so forced back to h3, I think. And I think at this point in time, kicking the knight backwards seems like a good move, so that's definitely a candidate move. And one good rule of thumb to remember in chess is that if you find a good move, try and find a better one. So what have we got here? That pawn's defended twice, only attacked once, so there's no real scope there. How are my pieces looking? This a3 square is still not really available for me. Generally, because my opponent's king is still in the middle of the board, a good general principle is to try and open up the middle of the board. So would d4 be a good idea? Let's say pawn takes. I can only recapture them with a piece. I've only got a knight that can capture there. So maybe think about moving this knight out of the way so that my pawns can advance up there. That might be an idea. Even b5 right now to stop ideas of this. Are there any major threats? Well, pawn pushing forward. Pawn pushing forward, it's defended by the rook, you see there. And then it attacks my bishop. My bishop can move here, because if bishop takes, I've got knight takes. But then that opens up h7, doesn't it? So I don't really want that. I want to prevent this if I can. I could kick the knight and then maybe drop my bishop back to h7. I think that move is now looking more appealing. So that if the pawn comes forward, comes back to there, there's no path through for the queen, because he's going to have white's going to have their own pawn on f5. I've got my pawn there. The queen attack is now a non-issue. So I'm kicking the knight. I expect the knight to go back to h3. If the pawn comes forward, then I'll probably just retreat to h7, where it's protected by my king and the knight. And still, there's the threat should this pawn ever move. The queen is in line still with the bishop on that nice diagonal there. So what are you going to do? I've got my front door open now, so the cockerels are even louder than normal. The other thing that's changed with this move is that the knight is now defended by the pawn. So that also takes away ideas of moving this knight out of the way with a discovered attack on that knight. At least in a direct sense. Can't move my knight to here, it's covered by bishop. Let's do a quick goldfish while we're here. Queen's defending a bunch of stuff. These are all defended. King's defending the pawn. Nothing's defending that, and nothing's defending that. These are all the defensive relationships, pretty much. Yeah, I don't always bother with rook defenses. So there are two undefended pieces right now. And if this pawn goes forward, I could be eyeing up the h2 pawn as well, which is no bad thing. And my opponent's having a good think, which is good to see. We've got plenty of time to think. The chess is all about the process that goes into your next move. Right? That's all chess is. I make a move, you make a move, then I make a move again, then you make a move. So the difference between who wins and loses the game is who makes the better moves. And what is a better move? Well, a better move is one that accelerates your progress into your opponent's position, gives you attacking opportunities, and also defends your side as well. So a really good move could be one that does more than one thing. So for example, bishop to f5 now, it doesn't seem like it's doing much, but it's attacking the knight, but it's also preventing the progress of this pawn here as well. So there's something to be said for that move. I do want to start, I want to kind of open up the middle, open up the centre, but I quite like my centre right now. It's pretty robust, and I don't really want to lose that pawn. So then the next thing I might do is to start to look at my pieces and think, okay, which of my pieces are underemployed right now, which could be in a better position to launch a future attack against white. So another idea is simply just to drop my bishop back to h7, but I don't have to do that now. I mean, should white push f5, I'll just drop my bishop back then. So there's no urgency there. I'm also thinking that I don't really want to capture that knight, because it would prompt g takes on there. Yes, white would end up with double pawns, but white would also end up with a semi-open file pointing straight at my king where he can put his rook. So I don't really want to encourage that kind of behaviour either. If I put my bishop there, could we be looking perhaps at something like this? Well, that's not really an issue. That pawn would only be defended once by this bishop, but attacked twice by my bishop on f5 as well. So let's go with that move and just see what happens. I don't see any serious danger from it. So which of my pieces are not really involved in the preparation for war? As Nimzovich says in My System, which I've just been reading, he says that the idea of development is what you're doing is that you are bringing your army forward towards the frontier, towards the front, to prepare for engagement. And that's what we're doing now. So I've completed development. White is a long way from completing development still, because he's really only trying to attack with two pieces, and you can't get through your enemy's position very often with two pieces unless you get very lucky, where your opponent makes a very silly mistake. So let's look at my pieces. This rook is defending a pawn push there. That could be useful. This rook, maybe not quite so useful, but considering the king's still in the middle of the board, I'm quite happy to have a piece there. Okay, so we have now got g4. Now, as we've said, one defender, two attackers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to capture that pawn. The question is, which of these two pieces should I use to capture the pawn? Which piece could be the most useful later in the game? Which piece could be the most aggressive right now? I'm thinking I've got these, my advanced pawns are on light squares, which makes my light square bishop maybe slightly less flexible in the game. So I'm going to capture with my bishop, and if bishop takes, I'm going to take with a knight. What that means is that I'm attacking the pawn on h2, and my defensive pawns are still nice and tidy. Pretty well arranged around my king, and I've got pieces around here as well that can jump into the defense of the king if required. So obviously now I'm attacking the knight. Okay, so there we go. So we've got an exchange there, and I'm up a pawn from this. It's also kind of opened up some space around the king. So now I might be thinking, hey, my queen could jump in. So how about my queen jumps in now? Comes with check and a fork on the knight. Let's do that. The knight can move back here, but my knight is also looking at that square. So that would be losing if the knight retreats. A better move might actually be rook g3, because it defends the knight, it blocks the check. That would be the move to play, I think, right now. So can my opponent find that move? Problem with that is as well, though, I can then capture on h2. Oh, the king has moved. Wow. That means I can just capture the knight, and it comes with another check. So what have we got? We've got interpose with the rook, or the king can run away to one of these two squares. Can't go here because of my knight, so that's out. This is not looking great. You can see how rapidly a game can just unfold or collapse for one of the players, and really it all just came from a slight miscalculation. You know, I thought I was winning a pawn. I won a pawn. I'm now a pawn and a whole piece up, and this king is looking very, very weak. Okay, so now I could grab the pawn with my queen, or I could grab the pawn with my knight. I could give another check. That's another idea. Can't bring my dark squared bishop into the attack right now because white has all these dark squared pawns. My knight also can't come to here or here because of those pawns. So I'm thinking maybe queen h4 check might be quite aggressive. What you need to do now, and this is what a more experienced player will do, say, okay, if I do that, what's my opponent going to do? Well, my opponent has four options. Could interpose the rook, in which case I'll probably just take the pawn. Or the king could go to any of these three light squares, because my queen will be on here, attacking here, right? So the dark squares are out. I'm going to try that. So I'm going to see what my opponent does, because I know I have options now. Again, I'm only attacking with two pieces here, but I'm attacking a king that's only got a rook by its side, because all of these other pieces are on the wrong side of the board and undeveloped, it has to be said. The queen has no scope right now. She can go there, she can go here, that's a better place for the queen. But right now white's in check, so there are no other options. So what are you going to do? You're going to put the bishop in the way? Oh, not the bishop, the rook. Okay, so now I have a check here as well with my knight. And what's going to happen after that? My knight can then come to here. That's a lovely square. I'm going to try this. So now the king has two options. There's nothing that can interpose. You cannot interpose a piece when a knight is attacking, and in this case the attack happens to be a check. So should my opponent come to this square, knight d3 would then be a double check, and it's also an outpost for my knight, which means it can't be harassed by a pawn. Okay, so this is now a double check. So I might have ideas now of bringing my queen in. So this king now has to go to one of these three squares. Okay. So queen to here is threatening the rook. And the rook actually has no safe squares on the back rank, because it could be taken from anywhere. And if the rook abandons the back rank, then queen e1 is checkmate. So I'm going to drop my queen into there. Queen takes knight, I simply recapture, or grab the rook with check and then recapture, which is an in-between move. But this is looking very precarious now. So what I'm trying to do here, I'm not trying to embarrass my opponent, I'm not trying to say that beginners are bad, although there's some truth in that. What I'm trying to do here excuse me, is to illustrate the difference between a beginner and a more experienced player, and particularly the thought process that goes on there. The rook actually can go to h1, I realise. But then again, I can just simply move my queen to g2, and then the rook is out of squares, because my queen's guarding those squares and my knight's covering e1. If the rook goes there, I've also got queen here, check. I think that would actually be checkmate as well. Yeah, that would actually be checkmate. So that is my next, that's my current greatest threat. And you can see how, you know, I've been stressing the fact that white was slow in development and messed around with his bishop a few times. And this is the consequence of not developing your pieces. It means he hasn't got a bishop out in the board that could be attacking me or helping to defend. This knight isn't helping to defend. This rook is doing nothing at all, and the king is still stuck in the middle of the board, where it's actually now hampered by its own pieces. This is why you want to get your king castled. Get your king safe behind a bunch of pawns and get your pieces working together. So what are they going to do now at this point? There are 16 rating points on the line here. I can only lose 16 points, my opponent can only gain. Okay, so now I think this is checkmate, right? King can't go there because the knight can't go there. Okay, there we go. Win by checkmate. So there you go. So that's opponent rated in the 500 to 600 range. What should they be thinking about? They should be thinking about the absolute fundamentals of developing your pieces, complete development in an orderly manner, get your king safe, right? That's it. So let's just revisit the opening a little bit. Okay, so we started with a quiet move. It doesn't really challenge the center very much. So I respond with pushing my pawn 2 squares and again. So now I'm attacking the center. Now he moves his bishop back. Complete waste of a move. I can't think of any reason to move your bishop back to there other than to defend that pawn which is not under threat. Big thing you see with beginners. Beginners will react to threats that are not yet real. Okay? Minor pieces come out into the board. My opponent plays a pawn move, that's okay. Now the bishop moves again. Completely pointless. Now he's completely thrown away the initiative. Now bishops come out. Now he develops a minor piece. All my minor pieces are now out in the board, and for some reason he moves his rook to f1, which I don't understand. Now I've castled, you see. We're only a few moves in. What's this? Move 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. Yeah, move 7. And my king is nice and safe. And if you look at the defensive relationships going on here, there's a lot going on. Right? Look at the coordination between all these pieces. Okay, that's undefended there. Queen and rooks are all defending each other. Okay, it's really nice and tight here. And the rook's defending that, and the pawn's defending that. Okay, that is what coordination looks like. Right? On my opponent's side of the board, that's undefended. You know, the thing is, at the start of the game, everything starts off defended anyway. Okay, but that's what we've got here. And it's not, it's not bad. We've both got one undefended pawn, but you can see the space advantage that I've got already by this point. And now a piece again moves for the second time in the opening, which you shouldn't do unless there's a very good reason to do so, and he doesn't have a very good reason. And now my development is complete. I think on move 8, which is as quick as you can do it, and now I'm ready to start maneuvering my army ready for an assault, and it doesn't take long for that assault to come by. So there you go. So if you're below 1000, particularly if you're around the 500 mark, these are the things you need to be working on. Right? It will definitely help you to win games. You've got to focus on your development. You've got to engage your army in the game in an orderly way and do it rapidly. Don't mess around with taking back moves. Try not to move the same piece twice, and this is a really, really good reason to do it. Limit your pawn moves, and you will simply do better. That's it. Okay, so thank you for watching. I hope this has been useful. Please do subscribe if you haven't subscribed to Chess Bootcamp, and I'll see you soon.